Hello, all collective listeners. On today's episode of the Samson Strength Coach Collective, we have Jarrett Moore. Jarrett works with women's basketball and men's and women's golf out of Notre Dame. I actually wanted to ask him about men's and women's golf. We didn't even get there because Jarrett was such an awesome dude, so genuine, and just to hear his philosophy on different basketball programs. He's been in a bunch of different, very successful programs. Then going into learning that he had his first day 2 days before the season started. I mean, that blew my mind. So I thought this was a fantastic episode. Jarrett was great to speak with, and I think y'all will really enjoy. Thank you for listening. Welcome, collective listeners, to another episode of the Samson Strength Coach Collective. On this episode, we have Jarrett Moore of Notre Dame University. Jarrett, welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Oh, absolutely. We're super excited. I was just off camera. We were just talking about the nice mohawk you had going. I was able to look at your Instagram a little bit. So I think our
Yeah.
viewers may be disappointed to see it's not there anymore, but we talked about the upkeep, so I understand.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we gotta keep things rolling and also look good, feel good.
Absolutely. That's the motto for sure. I use
Yeah.
that all the
Yeah.
time. So, well, Jarrett, again, thank you for coming on. Very excited for this conversation. Can you please just give listeners a brief background on your history in strength and conditioning and what kind of led you to your current position now?
Yeah, absolutely. Briefest history. I went to a strength and conditioning camp when I was 13 years old. At the high school I was going to be attending, and that was my first exposure to it, and I fell in love with it immediately. That was kind of my first introduction to the weight room, and ever since then, I had an extremely close relationship with that particular strength coach. His name's Colin Poise. He ended up being my first mentor out of college when I interned. I was a little lost as far as direction, but I knew I wanted to be around the weight room, and he, brought me in, kind of showed me the ropes, and said if you want to get serious in this world as far as the strength side, get your master's, do a GA position. And so I was at St. Mary's College of California for a few years, helped out with essentially every single team there. And then after St. Mary's, I transitioned to Purdue, where there I basically was an assistant to men's basketball and then assist every single Olympic team available. So it was basically like a glorified hybrid GA role. And then got elevated to assistant coach. And so I had women's swim, tennis, cheer, and then still assisted with men. And then was able to land a women's basketball position with men's and women's golf here at Notre Dame, and that's essentially my track in a minute.
Excellent. No, that's perfect. That's a
Yeah,
great summary. And that actually leads me with a lot of questions because,
yeah,
I think the biggest thing that we hear from strength coaches is typically they're introduced to the profession. I mean, I think of the Scott Cochran video of him showing the Alabama weight room, and,
yeah.
that's what kind of piqued my interest. But then I never really got exposure to it until college, really honestly, my senior year of college. So
Mm-hmm.
can you kind of just speak a little bit to what it was like to have a program that not only had a strength and conditioning coach, but also had a camp set up? And I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, so it's unique. High school, you get kind of a mixed bag. That's your question essentially, like that first
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir.
stage. Yeah.
Yep.
High school, you get a mixed bag of strength coaches, and as far as sometimes they're very elite, and other times you can get one that's kind of on the younger side of things. But this particular coach, he had worked for the Raiders for a few years, and realized he wanted to be basically he cared about the young development of athletes as opposed to the professional side and the
Yeah.
travel. And so he was essentially putting together an extremely high level program for 13, 14 year olds. And he kind of had this vision of developing athletes as young as possible so that by the time they're 18 you're getting some high level movers and performers. And so with that kind of 5 year structure from before you enter high school to when you're 18, you know consistent work, you really develop some people. So he had helped me develop into a Division I track athlete, and also helped me create a love with the weight room, and view all the growth I can have in the weight room, which made me want to come back to that high school and learn the ropes from him.
That's amazing. And
Hmm.
first of all, you forgot to mention you were a Division I track athlete.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't think about the running side of things
Yep.
so much these days, but that used to be a huge part of my life. Tried to sneak in the semi-pro side of things after college. It didn't really work out, but it was a huge part of my development as a
Absolutely.
person.
That's excellent. What
Yeah.
events were you?
So in high school, I was a 400 and 800-meter runner,
Oh my goodness. So you're
and
so
then
you're sick in the head.
yeah, and then when I got to college, I got bumped up to 800 in the mile,
Okay.
and so that was,
Even
you know,
even more brutal.
yeah, yeah. But I was always the type of person who wanted to know who the fastest kid on the block was. So
Yeah.
on a competitive side of things, I just wanted to win.
Oh yeah.
So that's just kind of the mindset I had. So I didn't really mind moving up.
Oh no, I'm sure.
Hmm.
Well, that's fantastic too. Just to, because I feel like out of all the sports, track is the most similar to the weight room. From a standpoint of you
Yeah.
truly get out of it what you put into it. So,
Yes. Yes.
do you feel like that program may have potentially played into your development in track and field as well, and your interest in seeing those results?
Yes. It was interesting when you're like a 800-meter runner. It's mid distance. You get a little bit of the distance side of things, and you get a little bit of the sprint side of things. And so, depending on the time of year I had, it was really cool. I'd get sprint specific type lifts, and other times of the year I'd get distance specific type lifts.
Mm.
So I got actually a pretty interesting like spectrum of weightlifting while I was in high school. So it was unique, and it's why I fell in love with the weight room.
Absolutely. I mean
Yeah,
that makes complete sense. So
yeah.
I mean that's what I love about the weight room, right? Is exactly, and I was a shot put a thrower myself, so
Oh, there we go.
yeah,
There we go.
and the big man 4x2 and indoor every
Oh,
once
there
in a
we
while.
go.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
I was running a smooth 26, so we were moving, not fast, but we were moving. So
Yeah.
excellent. Well, and so one of the things I find so interesting too is each of these stops along the way is such a storied basketball program. I mean,
Hmm.
to go from St. Mary's, which I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, they had just another first round draft pick this past year.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep, and then I mean they had another one. Was it either 2 years ago or the year prior to that?
If I'm not mistaken, last year Tommy Kuz was drafted to the
Yep,
Spurs, and they have a good track of high level basketball athletes
yeah.
that go through that program. Delvedova, Patty Mills,
I
some
mean
really talented athletes.
it's incredible. And then you go from there to Purdue. I mean,
Yeah.
which is a
Yeah.
perennial powerhouse. And then, I
Yes.
mean, now to work with Notre Dame women's basketball, who, if people aren't familiar, is a very, very storied program as well.
Yeah.
How do you feel like being at those places has kind of shaped your philosophy or your understanding of the sport of basketball and how you apply it to strength and conditioning?
The biggest thing I was able to learn through each university was not just the programming and implementation for better basketball players, but at each school you're dealing with one or two extremely high level athletes. So the athlete management side of strength and conditioning, whereas with some of these athletes, load on the bar is the least of your worries. You're trying to make sure that they can play basketball at the highest level possible and get a draft pick.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's the case, the goal is a little different. These athletes are very close to their genetic potential, and the last thing they need is on a weightlifting side of things is for me to mess that up. And so understanding stress, load, when to pull back, when to push. I was able to learn from some very good coaches who, were able to teach me, yes, program well, but also under stress or understand stress really well. And I think that's what's helped me get along that path.
Excellent. And so, what are some ways that you kind of modify that? I mean, to me, I look at somebody like John Morant, Amani Bates, guys who
Hmm.
typically are not the strength and conditioning poster boy, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But again, they're highly talented players. So,
yes.
what are some ways you kind of work around that?
Um, my general philosophy is just because you put it on a piece of paper doesn't mean it's the answer.
Mm.
Be willing to adapt on the fly depending on how that athlete's going to come into the weight room. Yes, there are times we need to work hard. Yes, there are times we need to get after it. And there are also times where, hey, we need to pull back and let you settle, get right, and progress from there. So, I'm someone who's pretty quick to make adjustments to the program to ensure that they're comfortable while getting better. Because at times, let's just say, I'm just gonna spitball a lift. Let's just say split squatting is what you have down, and it's just not the right exercise for the day. I'm talking primarily like in season stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If split squatting is causing issues, pull back, adjust. There's different ways to kind of what we talked about, skin a cat,
Yep.
and still get that stimulus that you need. So I think being willing to, adjust your current lift in the moment, because sometimes I get them after practice, and if it is a post practice lift and they're feeling it, like, hey, we need to make sure you're getting in the right direction and I'm not causing too much stress to your body.
Mm. And that makes complete sense. I mean, we're working with basketball myself. I've kind of been approached and asked before, like, why do you go to all the practices? Why do you go to all these events? And it's, well, I mean, when we're working up to 30 games, hopefully you're playing up to 36, 37 by the end of the season.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, you have to understand what those practices look like. There could be moments where the drills aren't going exactly how the coach wants, and then it kind of snowballs from there. So, I mean, what are kind of your key points then when working with the athletes on that? Is it communication with the athlete? Okay, you're nodding your head, so let's go with that. How do you develop that communication?
From day one, I constantly remind, tell me how you're feeling. I care about how you feel. And that's not in a sense that I don't like to use the word, but I'm going to use it. I'm not going to get soft on you, but if you can't tell me what you're actually feeling, I can't prescribe what's actually right for you. And you could have some athletes who are the get after it type athletes who like, I'll just fight through it, it's no big deal. But if our goal is to make a Final Four, fighting through pain might not be the answer. In that particular scenario. So I always want the athletes to be comfortable telling me how they feel to make sure we're going in the right direction. And most of the time it's just, I'm a little tired, and it's like, well, that's okay. Like, we can get through that. But in those moments where they tell me like, hey, Jarrett, I'm feeling some type of way with X, Y, or Z, like, I know it's real. And that's kind of the biggest piece as far as building that relationship with them, to make sure I'm putting the right stuff down.
Absolutely. And so I guess I have a twofold question here then, and we'll play to both parts. So first, how do you deal with athletes who, like you said, are kind of the grinder type of athletes, the ones who always want to push through, kind of I feel it's like the Damian Lillard philosophy, right? And then the Kobe philosophy. And then on the other side, how do you deal with the athletes who come in and they're like, hey, I'm always sore?
So, obviously we enjoy the ones who love to grind, and it just, I try and keep in mind, like, make sure it's not ego. Make sure we're not just getting after it just to get after it and show off, and, show off that, you enjoy the weight room, you're strong, and you enjoy lifting more than everyone else. Like, there is a clear separation from high quality lifts and ego lifts. So I think, when you're able to separate those two, you can kind of sniff out when it's the right time or wrong time to get after it. And on the flip side, with those who everything's an issue, this always feels bad. I try to be extremely selective of the words I use and the questions I ask them. So that it's not just, how do you feel? How do you feel? How do you feel? I'll allow them time to get maybe 1 or 2 sets in, and then just check in and start off with maybe like, hey, those look great. I hope they feel great. And that way I'm not giving them an opportunity to get out of it. And if it's an actual problem, then we can address it then. But I usually try and lead with the compliment side of things. Sometimes if someone who typically struggles hears they're doing well and they actually look good, don't give them a reason to back out. Like, allow them to kind of get through that.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a basic psychological principle, right? Of framing,
Yes.
and saying,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, oh, you look fantastic today. This is
Yeah.
exactly what I want to see.
Exactly.
You believe, I mean, how much these people perk
Yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah.
My,
And especially the
go ahead. Sorry.
basketball. Oh, sorry. Yeah, especially the basketball side of things. It's a type of sport. There's a lot of cameras. They want to look good,
Yep.
and if they do look good and you let them know, they'll ride that wave.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely. And it's funny because you do speak about this positive language. And so
yeah,
whenever I do have those players kind of speak up, my common joke, and I've actually said it so much now, I say to my athletes, don't make me say it, is I'll step up and I'll say, hey, I'm sorry. I want to see you get better. That's my fault, and then
yeah,
they kind
yeah,
of groan and get back to their
yeah,
set and they
yeah,
improve from
yeah,
there. So that's
yeah. No,
excellent.
love it, love it.
Well, I do want to touch on Notre Dame a little bit. I
Hmm.
mean, this is, I think Notre Dame is one of the largest national brands from a collegiate school standpoint.
Hmm.
Especially we were talking a little bit beforehand. I mean, even before I got into the field of strength and conditioning, I was at Notre Dame games. I was lucky enough to watch Notre Dame beat Stanford while Christian McCaffrey was playing.
Yep,
Fantastic game.
yep. Yeah,
And then I've been out just to visit a couple times. I mean, it's a fantastic program. What is it like to work at a school with this kind of storied success, especially with the history of somebody like Muffet McGraw?
yeah.
Such a storied basketball program as well.
It's extremely enjoyable. There are times, I'll go through the day to day rut of things where you're just like going through, it's a grind, and I'll stop and pause and kind of like realize like, whoa, like, I'm at one of a few schools where, you know, every person in the country knows about this school,
Yeah.
just the name of it, and so it is a unique situation to find myself in as far as like, when I have those moments, but uh, you know I've really enjoyed working here in the short time that I've been here. Just because the number one question I have been asked since I've been here is, what do you need? And usually, you're not asked that question. Obviously, it's within reason, but the school does an extremely good job of trying to make sure every department has the resources that they need um, to build success. And as far as working under the the history of who's come past the school. Muffet McGraw, Coach Ivy, the head women's basketball coach who brought brought the team an NCAA title in 2001 as a player, and then as an assistant coach in 2018, and now she's head coach. It really sets a standard. You looking at that, you're like, well, there's only one goal left as a head coach.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
got it as a player, you got it as assistant coach. We already know what the standard is, coming in. So I would say there is a decent amount of pressure, and I try to, remember to trust my guts. I know what I'm doing. Try not to get lost in the sauce with, what everyone else might be doing, because you have no context what another team is doing. They're doing what's best for them, and I'm here for a reason. But at times the imposter syndrome can kick in
Oh,
a little
certainly.
bit.
Yep.
But for the most part, we have a great staff here, and I really enjoy working at Notre Dame.
That's amazing. And
Yeah.
that really parallels my time at Texas Tech. So I worked underneath Krista Gerlich, who at the
Oh,
time
nice.
was,
Yeah.
she was a guard, won the national championship
Hmm.
with the Lady
Hmm.
Raiders in the 1990s. So, I mean, for her to come back, it was like, all right, exactly what you
Yeah.
said. It's like, well, there's winning a Big 12 championship is cool. But at the end of the day, like, we know what
Yeah.
the actual championship goal
Yeah.
is. So,
There's one goal in mind, one real goal in mind.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's cool too. This is kind of a one-off story, but the reason I mentioned Muffet as well is because obviously a very famous coach within that program's history. But I actually have a signed basketball by Muffet McGraw, and I believe
No
the
way.
2019 Notre Dame women's team. Yep.
Oh
So
man.
I won it in a foundation golf tournament. We actually got it for being the uh, uh, oh no, sorry, we won a separate prize. I was the worst golfer there, so I won a separate prize for that. But then through a raffle, I won the basketball as well. So
Oh
it
man.
just got me excited to know I'd be
Yeah.
speaking
No.
with
No.
you. So
No. It's crazy how small the world is, and the kind of like that 6 degrees.
oh yeah,
The connections people can have in the world is really cool. It's an awesome story to have. And, I don't have a signed basketball by Muffet or McGraw. That'd be great.
I would offer to send it to you, but it's kind of one of my
No,
prized
no,
possessions
it's
now,
okay.
so I
No,
don't think
keep
I
that.
will.
Keep
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
I
keep that.
certainly will. Excellent. So, okay, so switching gears just slightly, I did have a
Mhm.
question about your time at Purdue.
Mm-hmm.
and we did touch on it a little bit, talking about working with these high profile players, somebody like Zach Edey, obviously Naismith
Mm-hmm.
Player of the Year previous
Mm-hmm.
year. One of the things that Purdue's known for is being like the tallest team in the country almost every
Yeah.
year. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
what are some interventions that you use with those players, or you used at the time at Purdue, to kind of address those in those kind of almost abnormal bodies on a majority of the
Mm-hmm.
team?
Yeah. So while I was there, I was essentially a direct assistant to the head men's basketball strength coach. So for the first portion of my time there, I worked under Braden Welsh, and then the second portion of my time there, I worked under Jason Cabo, both two extremely talented strength coaches. And you know, the I would say yes, like limb length, height, all that kind of stuff matters. But also one thing I learned is a lot of the athletes to get after it.
Yeah.
Someone like Zach Edey, where people could argue about science of bench press, all that kind of stuff. Like he wanted to be strong regardless of how long his limbs were. And so, yes, there might be times where the biggest thing would be like, all right, let's bring the blocks out if we're going a little bit heavier. But he was the kind of person who didn't want blocks; he just wanted to bench. And so, as long as it was within reason, like let the guy get after it. The amount of times I've spotted him and I went to get some help just because he was at that sticking point, he'd be like, "No, don't touch the bar." And so, giving the opportunity, or giving the athletes the opportunity to, get their work done and not, have them feel limited in their, pieces of what makes them great. But also keeping in mind, uh, you know, certain things like Olympic lifts may not be the best idea for certain athletes. Yes, hang cleans are great, but the world won't change if you don't hang clean.
Yep.
And so just being selective and specific with the positions you're going to put your athlete in, and if you can hang clean, great. If a rep looks bad, call it.
Yep.
And so there was one athlete we had who we tried to hang clean, and this was preseason, so a few weeks before the first game, and it was terrible. And the athlete was told that's the last time you're going to try and hang clean for the rest of the year. And
There you
that's
go.
just what it was.
We've got time in the
Uh,
off season.
yes, exactly. We could work on those skills later. And it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a failure. We just picked something else to make sure that they got the adaptation we needed.
Excellent. One thing I really appreciate about saying that the program you work with at Purdue and now your personal philosophy and what you apply at Notre Dame is this free flowing sense, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
getting stuck in your specific ways and what's going to work for
Mm-hmm.
you best and what you believe in the most.
Mm-hmm.
What are some more ways that may come out within your program? I mean, I know you touched on communication with your athletes, but or possibly what are some benefits you've seen from that, or
Mm-hmm.
the results that you've seen from that philosophy?
Um, it once you get a good flow with the athletes, because yes, initially, and especially the first couple weeks. My first day with Notre Dame women's basketball was 2 days before the first game.
Wow.
So yeah, so talk about like jumping in and like what can we do? Uh, you know, I would say this first past season, it was a lot of trying to figure out what can these athletes handle from a programming standpoint, and I would say lots of adjustments
Yeah,
that first season. But
absolutely.
coming into the off season, now that I've made those adjustments, you start to find a rhythm of what they're actually really good at. So it allows you to feed into their strengths while knowing what you need to tweak up for the weaknesses. And so now we're finishing this summer off season phase. There's not too many adjustments that we need to make as the program gets through, because now I'm able to kind of sprinkle in basically things I know they're capable of doing and can work on a technical side of things without it putting them at any risk.
Yeah,
So once you kind of have that free flowing system initially, you start to be able to kind of figure out where's that perfect middle ground of quality work that you can coach up, but it doesn't blow them up. And then you find yourself not making nearly as many adjustments as you initially had to.
absolutely. I think that's
Yeah.
a perfect example of it. But I do want to touch on that. I mean, coming into the team 2 days before the first game of the season, like, I mean, talk to me about that experience. What was that like?
I think I almost had a heart attack every single night.
Yeah.
Yeah. I there's not too often a strength coach gets hired and has a first day October 24th, and um, I, you know, kudos to Coach Ivy and the system that she holds. Like, all these kids have such high levels of integrity uh, and such good work ethic that you made my job easier as far as not needing to police up things that don't make us better. Um, and so they were allowing me to figure out what works best. I did feel at times towards the end there, when the fatigue started kicking in late in the season, we started hitting postseason, we're running out of variations we can do that won't make us sore. So that was probably the most exhausting side of things, because I was able to do a kind of like a microdose style of programming, and so we lifted every single day. I was able to get before practice in season, which was great. Basically, every time we touched a basketball, they did some type of lift aside from game day. Game day we let the athletes have, but I would say trying to figure out what was right while trying to win basketball games was not a pleasant
No,
experience.
certainly not. I can't imagine.
Yeah, when you can't build a base yourself, and this is no knock on anyone who came before. It's just when you every style of training program is different,
Yeah.
and every coach is different, not better or worse. And so how I coach is going to be different than every other person in the world, and vice versa. And so trying to figure out where on the dial I needed to be was quite difficult,
Yeah.
because we're trying to travel, we're trying to squeeze 15-minute lifts, and my lights turned off.
That's all good.
So it was very difficult, but what's nice is, like, we were able to get through the season. We got a Sweet 16, which is nice, not where we wanted to be, but now I think going into the next season, we're going to be in a far better place,
Yeah.
because I am quite excited for the changes that we're going to make. And I kind of communicated to the athletes ahead of time, like, hey, how we kind of ran it last season won't be the same way we're going to run it next season.
Yep.
And they're open to that, and they've caught on to how I coach, what my flow of things are, and so there won't be nearly as many hurdles that we need to overcome.
See, now that's what I'm the most curious about, right? Because I feel like as a strength coach, there's almost two versions of me, right? There's the
Yeah.
off season me, then there's the in season me.
Yeah,
where
yeah.
off season me is going to be a lot more of the pusher, the motivator,
Yeah.
the like this. There's no time to be sore, or if you are sore now, like that's okay. That's what the off season's for. In the in
Mhm.
season, it's much more. I feel like a listening ear, somebody to
Yeah.
help and support. So,
Yes.
what was that transition like? Especially in the role of strength coach, it's always to be supportive and positive, but
Mhm.
I've even talked to my sister's a professor, and this is the best advice she ever gave me was, always start off stricter, always start off a little bit more reserved, and then progress from there into showing them a little bit, more of who you are, and setting up the baseline so that those standards were set initially and going from there. I feel like that's kind of
Mhm.
almost like the reverse process for you coming in.
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
be super
Yeah.
listening and then transition. So, what was that transition like going from your in season to then seeing the off season Jarrett?
Uh, it's crazy that you mentioned that up. It was, to be honest, it made the off season far more stressful on my side of things, because I knew I wasn't acting like the coach I necessarily wanted to be,
Yeah,
um, and so going into the off season, being very particular on communicating, like, this is how it's going to be. This isn't like what you're used to seeing and experiencing is not how it's going to be. And that was something I said the very first day, to make sure they weren't like shocked at, like, yo, Jerry, you're acting different. You're acting some kind of way. Like, what's going on? Like, making sure they knew, like, hey, like, we're here to grow. So if we're here to grow, we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again.
yeah,
And I need to change how I act with you guys to make sure we don't build that habit. And I'm not saying anything bad happened, but what we were doing, the style we were doing it, what was best fitted for that moment. And now we're going into an off season where we need to have basically tighten the bolts up to make sure we're going in the right direction. And so I told them, hey, I'm gonna always put down what I think is best for you, but at a certain point, we need to just work. And they were very receptive to that, and they understood.
yeah.
Like, all the athletes even said themselves, like, hey, like you didn't build our base, like you didn't know us.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that like you were just thrown into the flyer trying to adjust on the fly, and trying to help us just prepare for basketball games. And they understand the shift as far as time periods of like there's a basketball priority time of the year and there's a weight room priority time of the year. And the fact that they knew that in general made the shift, not too bad. But in my head, I was just like, you gotta make sure like they know it'll be a little different.
Yep. Yep.
But
Absolutely. And I mean,
yeah,
like you speak of, the imposter syndrome always creeps up and everything. And so,
yeah,
I mean, it's just making me nervous just thinking about it right now,
yeah,
understanding that
yeah,
process.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, but to speak to what your philosophy on coaching is, right? It's establishing this deep level of care. I care
yeah,
about you. I want to see the best for you, right? And then understanding from there, that care can be misconstrued without that off season. It can be seen
yeah,
as, well, I'm going to be somebody who's always going to adjust and do whatever you want, but that's
yeah,
more of what the in season has to be. So I just think it's remarkable that you had that experience, but I'm sure it made you better.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I I think I'm a better coach having experienced it. Not too many times you get thrown into that type of setup. And I'm very excited to not have to do that next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't mean to keep harping on this, but I just,
No, no, you're
as
good.
somebody in basketball, it's pretty remarkable to hear something like that. My story was when I first got to Texas Tech, the coach I was hired by was let go within the first 2 weeks of me
Hmm.
being there. So,
Oh,
it was me
yeah,
and our athletic trainer. So I was
yeah.
Dobo,
Oh,
strength
there we
coach,
go.
court
There we
workouts, all
go.
this type of stuff. So I resonate a lot with what you're saying,
Yeah,
but I still had July,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so what was that relationship like with the staff as well? I mean, especially in the heat of the season, developing those communication skills and,
Hmm.
starting to develop their relationship. How did that process kind of form?
Well, what was I was glad I kind of had this set up. Basically, I essentially had a the every lift aside from like exercises, every lift from a stimulus side of things programmed for the whole season my first day.
Excellent.
So when I showed up, I basically had a calendar from my first day to what would ideally be the last day of the season, April 1st or 2nd,
Yep.
and said, this is what type of lift we're going to do based off of our game schedule. And so just coming in, having a plan, um, put the coaches, I don't want to say at ease, but it was like, okay, like we have a game plan. We're not just, creating things out of thin air. And so having come in with a plan made everyone's basically, I don't want to say guard go down, but it made everyone relax a little bit and trust the flow of the process. Um, because, if I can imagine on a coaching side of things or sport coaching side of things, like it could be kind of stressful, like what are we actually doing? But if you can come in with a plan, and they'll know you at least are putting attention to detail to the craft and development of the athlete. And I think like if I hadn't come in with a plan, it would have been an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
So at least programming that ahead of time, and luckily I had the game schedule because the season had already started, so it was actually pretty easy. You just made an Excel sheet, said that we're going to do this on this day, this day, this day. Just keep following that same pattern through the rest of the season, and you actually know what you're doing stimulus wise every single day.
Wow, and that's, fantastic. I mean, clearly, something I preach to our interns and other coaches is obviously preparation is going to be key,
Yeah,
right? But I
yeah,
mean, that shows
yeah,
preparation was the crux of
yeah.
developing your relationship with them.
Yes, yes. And if anything ever did get difficult, like all you had to do was actually just look at your plan, and it actually solved all your issues. If you have, like, there were some days where I'd finish the lift, I'm like, oh man, like, is this right? And then I just pull back up the season plan, and it's like, oh well, you know, I'll just make this adjustment for this. It's actually not that big of a deal. Like, we're
Yep.
still following the flow of things. Don't like, I think strength coaches can be like the hardest people on themselves as far as like seeking perfection when nothing will ever be perfect. As long as you have a system and a flow that is consistent for yourself, the athletes, and the coaches, it's actually pretty simple.
Yeah. And I think that's a massive bomb you just dropped there. I think absolutely. I mean, I think of even today. We had our Wednesdays are our off day, so I
Yeah.
had the weight room available for any of our men's or women's players who wanted to come in and do extra work. And I've kind of shifted to a philosophy this year of more of like, what do you want? Like, what do you want to
Yeah.
do when you come in?
Yeah.
Eh, I do also still have a plan. I know exactly, okay, if they say their hips
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
tight, then we're going to do these exact
Yeah.
drills, right? But I mean, I was hesitant to start it at first, but then, like you said, I look back at the bigger picture. I understand, okay, this isn't interrupting our lifts on other days. If somebody
Hmm.
does want to do some assault bike work because they want to work on conditioning, it's not going to, the whole thing's not going to unravel. We have a plan in
Yes,
place. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Like, eh, I remember at St. Mary's, the the coach who had men's basketball at the time, his name was Max Baer, but he was a big believer in that one. It was like 2 days before a game, they had a few days off, or they had a few days, without a game. Guys would walk in, he's like, "Hey, what do you want to train today?" And they would say their big gun lift for the day, and then he would just build everything outside of
Yeah.
that. You're still following progressive principles and creating a solid program. So I love hearing you say that because it takes me back to my St. Mary's days where it's like, hey, guys walking like, hey, what do you specifically want to work today that's going to make you feel good?
Yep.
And guys would say that, and it's like, okay, this is what you're doing since you're doing that.
And I don't know if you've noticed the same trend, but I get a lot more people coming in on the off days now
Yeah,
because, I don't have something set. It's not
yeah,
like, okay, you're going to come in, you have to do this specific thing. They want
yeah,
to come in because, well, you'll listen.
yeah, exactly. And also, what's really nice is when you start to get the athletes to feel prepared when they lift. When someone says, I feel good when let's just say trap bar deadlift, I feel good when I trap bar deadlift. Once they start to learn their own bodies, it's so exciting because it's like the world is, at your hands as far as like what you can do. Because when a general lift starts to feel like a recovery day because they're just moving and it feels good to move, like you can just do so much.
Well, that's when you're rolling big time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, excellent. Well, okay, we've discussed the transition in the off season. What are some? Well, I have a couple questions here. What are some successes you've had this off season? Not necessarily from a programming standpoint, but from a relationship development, seeing players grow, and then
Hmm.
what are some of your main focus points for this off season as well?
Some successful moments I feel like I've had is just on the technicality side of things. Um, you know, Specifically, snatches and cleans. Like I feel like the ladies have really bought into my flow of things, which makes coaching and cueing so much easier. I think the biggest overall success is I haven't had to tell anyone to focus up once.
Oh, there you go.
In all since our first like kind of off season day in April, not once have I had to say the phrase "focus up." And so when you start having that kind of flow of things, all my voice is doing is saying cues and fixing up the technical side of lifts. So since my voice is going where it needs to go, the quality of the lifts have gotten up. So I feel like some of the more dynamic stuff looks better. I feel like some of the strength work is starting to look crisp, and so it just feels like the combination with the focus, the combination with the cues in my voice, you're starting to see those real technical changes, which is really enjoyable. Um, and then, you know, I would say biggest focus points this off season. I think sprint mechanics are probably the biggest focus point that I've been working on. As far as I want them to be able to get up and down the court with one higher quality of running, and two, just getting more bang per step. I'm not saying these athletes are gonna run down the court and transition and look like a track athlete, but I think if you can have higher quality moving mechanics, it just makes everything easier.
Yep.
And if anything, like what is something sport coaching on the basketball side always talk about is that first step acceleration. Working on your 10-yard accelerations, on the strength side of things is killing two birds with one stone. You're getting the sport coach side of things with that first step, and you're increasing their sprint mechanics. So that's been, I would say, aside from strength, power, speed, all that kind of stuff, the sprint side of things has been the biggest focus point.
Excellent. It's so funny you say that because I just was even talking to another strength coach about this previously. I went to a conference at CSCCA a couple
Mm-hmm.
years ago, and unfortunately, I can't remember his name now. He was the Wyoming men's basketball strength coach at the time, and I feel like women's basketball. The running joke is kind of talking about conditioning, and always
Mm-hmm.
making sure players are in shape. And so I was just stressed out. I was like, "What do we do for conditioning? What do we do? How do I make sure that we're in shape?" And just I really wanted to pick everybody's brains and and I didn't even have to ask him directly. He just spoke about it in his talk. He just talked about how movement efficiency is one of the best things you can do for your
Mm-hmm.
conditioning, because
Mm-hmm.
clearly if you're efficient, you're not expending necessary energy.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You said it perfectly. Like we have a catapult that we use with the athletes, and we look at player load, and we can have two athletes who play roughly the same amount of minutes, but the higher quality mover always has a decreased player load
Yep.
compared to the one that she'll get after it. She'll guard the hell out of somebody, but she's taken 3 steps when it takes the other athlete 1 step to get to. And that in itself, just one, you're getting less stress on the body, and two, you're getting from point A to point B faster.
Absolutely. So, what are your key points on coaching that?
Um, First off, like keeping it as simple as possible, as far as like let them get a few reps in, just so you can analyze like tendencies and habits of the athlete. And then looking for maybe the 3 biggest cues amongst the group that everyone will benefit from. Um, whether it's be starting position, whether it be arm drive, whether it be torso angle when you're starting the acceleration work. Um, Look for everyone's general habits and try and find the 3 things that you feel everyone can benefit off of. Because then you can keep the language consistent. And then if you ever get those, one-off sessions where you work with that athlete alone, then you can start queuing up their really specific stuff. Um, but I'd say keeping the cues simple and doing what everyone might need will help you get your job done quickest.
Yeah. Wow, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm even learning stuff here. I'm asking you selfishly at this point.
No,
I don't
no,
care
it's
about the
great.
listeners. I just want to know for myself. So.
Yeah,
Excellent. That's amazing. So,
yeah.
and I'm just curious now here too. Do you feel like your track background has helped enhance that quality of coaching that, and then do you feel like it's maybe made you more aware of that movement quality?
I would say it's helped me be very comfortable um, taking on the task of coaching athletes sprinting and acceleration. Um, we all have like our niche that we feel strong and extremely competent at, and there are other things that every coach has it where they're like, oh, man, this is where I struggle the most. And fortunately, on my side of things, I've never felt uncomfortable teaching an athlete sprinting mechanics. Not saying I don't have anything to learn. I don't
Yeah,
have anything else to learn. There's a
of course.
ton I could learn. And I remember glossing over the Altus, sprinting course, and there's so much detail in there as far as how to break down a sprint, how to coach it, how to periodize sprinting throughout the year. Um, but I would say having a track background has made me very comfortable on implementing it in my workouts and periodizing it throughout the year.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned Altus. Are there any other resources that you really like to turn to, or anything that you'd recommend to our listeners if that's something they're looking to improve within their coaching game?
Yeah, I would say Altus is extremely helpful. The courses are they're dense, like so it's not a 30-minute read. Like there's some high quality information in there, but you have to be prepared and have a beginner's mindset as far as like absorbing new information that you might be unfamiliar to you. I had a track background and it felt super unfamiliar to me as far as learning the coaching side of sprinting. Um, Other pieces, I think Simply Faster is an extremely great resource because you have coaches um, basically posting research that they do that it's hard to be published out there. It's a lot of work to be published, but something like Simply Faster is a resource for strength coaches to basically look up anything you'd want to know, whether it's plyometrics, strength training, different methods of periodization, and the world is yours as far as what is on there. So I would say I go to Simply Faster probably 2 or 3 times a week just
Yeah,
to brush up on what brush up on what I'm trying to implement with my athletes. And I'd say the last piece is basically all my mentors. I try and keep up with them as much as possible because at the end of the day, those are the people who accelerated my growth through the years. And there's no way I learned everything from them. And they're the ones who kept it 100% real with me. So, never being afraid to call and say, hey, I'm dealing with this issue, or I'm stuck on this, and getting their perspective on things, because they will be 100% upfront with you, because they know you. And so just because you've, moved on to somewhere else doesn't mean you can't ask your, old mentors for help.
Yeah. And I think that's just so true because
Mm-hmm.
my main mentor, he's actually the first episode of the podcast we did that was not, we did one episode that was kind of the transition of hosts. And it was the first
Yep.
episode of the podcast there is Dan Worth of the University of Tennessee. And he's like the nicest human being on the planet.
Oh, love
And
it.
he
Yeah.
will be very upfront with you, but say it in
Yeah.
a really nice way. And I remember
Yeah.
I called him,
Yeah.
I was struggling, and I just said, well, I just don't feel like they're really listening to me. I don't feel like I understand it. He's like, well, how are you getting across? What's your information
Mm-hmm.
sound like? And I kind of talked him through my language and everything. He's like, yeah, you don't sound confident at all. He's like, so why would they listen to you? And I was like,
There you
all
go.
right,
There
but
you
he said it in
go.
the nice way. He was like, well, potentially your confidence, and, and he kind of kept
Yeah.
going from there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that's so huge.
No, I love it. I was once, this is early on in my GA days, but I remember, just learning the field of strength and conditioning, and I was told, there were things I needed to be adjusted. And it was it was stern and kind at the same time. So I remember getting out of the car thinking, like, did I just get told off? But,
Yeah.
like, super kindly. But like that in itself, one showed the quality of, who was mentoring me. This was Max Baer. He cared about my well-being, but he also was real enough to tell me, like, hey, like, X, Y, and Z needs to change, because that's the point of your role. And ever since then, no matter what, I'm always down to shoot him a call, ask him questions, just try and problem solve with him whenever I run into roadblocks, because he's always been 100% real with me on that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And we had, unfortunately, I have this fantastic intern. It was his last day today. So
Yeah.
I was sad to see him go, but I've noticed now being on the more of the mentor side, it's interesting to see how these things pop up and how you communicate those things. I'm working on my own communication and making sure it's in the nice way and not just me just being super blunt, But
Yeah.
I mean, he left and I told him, I said, please call. Like that's what
Yeah.
this is about. You're supposed to call
Yeah.
me. We're supposed to talk through things.
Yeah. Actually, one more example. I only say this because I've been meaning to call him up and tell him, but my time at Purdue, I remember Brady Wells. We were kind of just going over how things are going and plan for the guys, and he was kind of evaluating what I was doing. But he, you know, discussed me just the organizational side of things, and that was one piece that was lacking at the time. And he was like, "Hey, like, you know how to be a coach, you know how to program, you know how to make a lift, but like if you're not organized, like you're not going to make it past the first interview.
Yeah.
People will be able to sniff that out real quick. And at the end of the day, like, him telling me that led me to making a plan before going to Coach Ivy.
Yep.
And so, you know, and a couple weeks go by, a couple months of programming, and she'd one day thank me for how well I was organized. And nobody had ever said that to me ever in my life.
Wow.
And so, like, talk about like a super impactful moment that we'll never forget. You can have all the successes in the world as far as, championships, whatever. But I guarantee you, one thing I'll never forget is her telling me I'm organized and remembering the conversation I had about needing to be more organized.
Yeah. Wow.
And so it just kind of shows, like, how impactful those mentors can be in your life.
Absolutely. I mean, those conversations are awkward, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you have interns now, but like me bringing up stuff, like I'm like, his seat is over here, and I'm like sitting there, and I'm like, all right, am I going to say something or not? And I like just turn around and I communicate that to him. So, but I mean, truly, like I care about their growth, and even in a player meeting we had yesterday, I talked to the players about it. And I just said, look, like I'm going to hold you to a certain standard. I'm going to tell you if you're not meeting that standard, because to me, I don't actually really care about you if I'm not making sure you're holding yourself to that standard.
Yeah. You're only setting them up for failure if you don't tell them what's actually going on. And I'll be the first person to say, I struggle with hard conversations. Like,
Yep.
I truly struggle with them, but if you don't say it, it'll never get better.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
it's that temporary awkwardness and for a long-term gain and improvement of the players, and that's the
Yeah,
role of the coach
exactly,
too. Is
exactly.
a lot of these people aren't going to be professional players, so why not help them develop life skills at the same time too?
Exactly,
Wow.
exactly.
Excellent. All right. So this is a new question. This is actually inspired by
Yeah.
my player meetings yesterday, but I'm just curious. What are some things that you are looking to improve for yourself this upcoming year?
Let me think. Going into this upcoming year, um, do you mean on a more professional side or on, a coaching side of like implementation with the athletes?
I would say, more of a personal side, potentially related to coaching. But if you feel like there's something that
Yeah.
is personal, then I'd love to hear it as well.
Yeah. I would say on the professional side, um, you know, I would say as if I were to evaluate the work that I do, you know, the standard I set for myself is the work I'm doing something I'm afraid for other people to see?
Mm,
And so, you know, and this goes into just like the pre-prep of things. Like, are you going to prepare something you would want the world to see? And I'm just talking about like my development within myself, and how I want to grow within the field. Um, I want to make sure if I'm putting myself out there, it's high quality stuff. But the only way to do that is to do the work on the front end, and make sure you're putting out a good product for your product, like good program for your athletes. And that's the only way you can really grow. And it won't help if I'm constantly trying to hide in the shadows because I'm afraid of doing the wrong thing. And so, if we were talking like a preparation side of things, like do as much work on the front end to that you're giving the athletes something you're proud of, something you're proud to show others, and it's going to be the highest quality work for yourself. And I would say this first year, some of it might have just been nervousness of starting, this kind of role. But I don't want to sit in my office and try and put out lifts and like I hope no one sees this. Like I want everyone to see the stuff that I'm doing, because I feel like I do a good job. People can learn from me, and that would help people to reach out to me and just ask questions. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? And it sparks dialogue. And so that is what I'm trying to work on the most this year, is being more upfront with the work that I do, showing mentors, maybe posting a little bit more, um, to kind of just like spark more dialogue within myself, so that that'll help me grow a little bit. But you're only going to want to post what you like,
yep.
and I want to make sure that hey, is if this is going down, this is the best we're working with, and you have to make sure like it's high quality stuff no matter what. We're not just making a lift the day of. We are making sure these athletes are prepared. But it's just it's a combination of like my personal development and wanting uh, to grow in a way that people want to learn from me, and also spark conversations with some of the really big names out there.
Yeah. And I can tell you, I'm looking forward to seeing more posts because I was able to look at your Instagram beforehand. I
Yeah.
saw a lot of really high quality stuff. So
Oh, thanks, man.
I'm excited to see more. I'm really excited to
Yeah,
see more. So,
yeah,
well, Jared, really, I want to thank you for your openness and vulnerability on the podcast and being able to speak
yeah.
about the things that I feel like a lot of strength coaches don't really speak about. That was
Hmm.
something that when I heard about the opportunity to be on this podcast, I wanted to make sure that that was something that was revealed and that came about from this, So I just do want to say I appreciate it. And I'm sure the listeners appreciate it as well of you being open about these things, talking about,
Yeah,
experiencing a little bit of imposter syndrome,
yeah,
understanding areas of growth. So thank you.
yeah. No, thank you so much for having me. And this kind of stuff is super helpful with development of people who are watching it, and development of people like me who are on it. Um, because the funny thing of this all is, we're all afraid of judgment from each other, but I feel like strength coaches are also some of the nicest people who want to help other
Yes.
people. So, you know, why wouldn't you want to do that? And some of it's fear of failure, but you know, even hopping on this podcast, like you're a super nice guy who I know we'll keep in contact
Oh,
throughout
for
the
sure.
the upcoming years. And so this kind of stuff helps foster that communication amongst coaches and helping each other grow in the field.
I think that's it's such a huge point because
Yeah.
I think about what I post. I think about, what I present to the world, and I think about it like, man, I hope people aren't judging me on this, and everything. And then I
Yeah. Yeah.
also look at everybody else's posts, and I'm always like, oh, I love that. That's really good. I
Yeah.
like doing this. Like it's so funny because to hear you say that about like, yeah, like the way you think of things is so different from how the world really is. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
100% true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Connor, thank you so much. I really, really was an enjoyable time being on this podcast.
I had a great time as well. Thank you, Jarrett. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
All right. All right.
All right. Bye bye.